for attending. I'd like to call the meeting to order, noting all the board members that are here as well as appropriate guests. And I need approval of the agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I did not receive any public comments. Rebecca, anything that coming to you? Perfect. So we are consideration of a baseball fundraising request. I don't know if anybody wants to do any intros or what like that or.
Sure. So Randy and I have had a chance to meet with the Baseball Booster Club a couple of times. Most recently, just the week before last, Mike had an opportunity to join us at that meeting, and we talked through kind of some of the longer term plans. We also had an opportunity to talk about the Title IX report and how, as an administrative team, we are planning to meet with all of the booster clubs to have kind of a global discussion on what Title IX means and how we want to approach fundraising moving forward. So the baseball group is aware of the fact that obviously that's a part of our process moving forward, and that any amenities that we're going to be looking to introduce to our athletic facilities need to have that Title IX component to it. So we had that discussion with the group. One of the things that the baseball group wanted to have facility committee input on was consideration for using a similar fundraising model to the softball model from last spring, which would be to allow advertising on the fence. So we did attach a document that outlined some of the fundraising goals for the booster club for baseball. But we asked Micah to come to just provide some insight to the committee on what the thoughts were around this and any further information that you'd like to share.
Yeah, thank you. So we're looking to start to get sponsors. I don't think we want to call it advertising because of our 501c3 status. There's some word verbiage in there. So we're looking for sponsors and to acknowledge what those sponsors are doing for us. We're hoping to get 6x7 banners to put up with their logo or whatever we're able to put on there, that falls into the guidelines that I think have been spelled out a little bit. 6 feet and our windscreen is 6 feet instead of 5 feet, which is a little bit bigger than softball. That's why ours would be 6 feet, and then 7 to 8 feet, whatever would be the appropriate dimension back with that. We're looking at about $1,000 a year. That first year, we're looking for coverage of, we're talking about having coverage of the pay for that to be included in that first year. And then in hopes if they renew that, we would start to take on if we need to replace those banners at that point. I was thinking when we put up the windscreen, it's usually about middle of March and it comes down about the end around September, October. So that's over half of the year that those sponsors would be able to get visible, 5 to 7 months, depending on time there, that they'd be able to be seen. The other thing that I wanted to bring up about these sponsors that we've been throwing around is that we have some high visibility spots that I would want to know how we can do some things with that, because we have some land that goes right up against Century Avenue, and we have back of left field for us is along the road that is there. That's where the 2 parking lots, you stake between those 2 parking lots. So they get a lot, that would be a lot of visibility as well. So we're hoping that we can increase, if the sponsor wants to pay a little bit more, they could get a premium spot as well. I didn't know if that would cause issues with the facility committee. So that's something I wanted to bring up before we just started doing, obviously. So really what we're looking for is just the approval to start doing the sponsors. If we have some immediate needs, you'll notice I split the what we would use funds for in 2 different things. The fundraising, the immediate uses, those are things that just kind of come up yearly that we might need, that it's hard to budget for. Like we don't get helmets every single year, so we don't necessarily have a specific budget line for that. So this would help with that. It would help with away game food if we're off a little bit in our budget. So those top ones aren't anything that necessarily cause disparity between different programs. Whereas those bottom ones, as I was looking at it, might, and some of those bottom ones would actually probably be ones that we would work closer with softball. Part of my hope is getting the approval now is that once the school board and the facility committee is ready to start moving forward on some projects, then we would be in a spot financially that we could move forward. We would definitely be waiting for the go ahead to do anything on that, definitely on the bottom of that list. So
How much you think you can raise with these, or what's your projection?
this conversation just got started of like, how many do you think we could fit? We have about 500 feet of space and about 60 to 80 of that is going to be taken up by Waunakee Warriors signage. So I would say we're going to avoid some space around that. So I'm going to say we have about 300 feet of just inside of the fence space. And that's not including that behind left field. That's not including the bullpen side. So we have the potential for, I don't know, we could probably fit an easy 20 on the inside, fit another 5 to 10 in those high traffic areas. We could be looking at for $1,000 a piece. You know, we're looking at a pretty good sum every year.
So are you picturing in those premium spots, like two different advertisers on it or the same one and just on it?
I'm not really sure at this point. I mean, we're just trying to get this moving. I would say it could be either, or maybe there's another option there of like the front back. Could be an additional.
And just to add to what Mike is saying, we're not asking the committee to approve any of those longer term projects. That's part of the discussion that we need to have with other groups as well, which we're going to be initiating. It's more so along the lines of the typical use of fundraisers that wouldn't impact the facility. But like he said, it would put them in a better position long term as we begin that dialogue. So we haven't yet had a chance to meet with all of the booster groups. We're in the planning process for that right now. So just want to reiterate from the administrative perspective, we would recommend approval of the sponsorship for traditional fundraising uses with a future discussion about the facility itself.
How does what Mike is describing match up with what softball has done?
Similar.
Softball has,
And softball got started later in the process last year, and then we had some issues we had to work through. So they didn't have a full, opportunity to really get as many sponsors. I would assume that there'll be more of them this year that you would see because they have much more time to plan for it.
how many sponsors do they?
It's their
We've got the same issue that baseball does. They have the Warriors in the middle and they kind of work around with
Which is also planned, like we want that to be front and
a
center.
smaller field.
Yeah, it's a smaller field, so they have less space, but I want to say they have about 5 to 10.
Yeah, I think it's in that range.
How does it conflict with or go along with the pennant program? Because we still have that going as well.
We're trying to phase out that kind of
Okay.
program. We've talked about some of those companies that did the pennant program, kind of make it right, maybe. Because I don't know if those pennants were very visible. I mean, you've been up at the field, you saw how those pennants were, they weren't the most visible. So making right with them a little bit and maybe finding a way to make that this first year, maybe we take the cost of their banners, we take on that cost this first year. So kind of you're right with them.
We've had a few issues with weather taking the field down and some other issues. And I know that you've changed a few different materials and designs of them. So
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, this would be a lot better than that pennant. Just this is made to handle some of the wind. So that happens up there.
And I mean, past fundraisers, you've had like the SALT program, it's been successful. Is that like abandoned or?
I believe hockey does the salt now. We now do quick trip cards. And part of the reason that we want to start doing some of this is so our need for the quick trip cards and our booster fees. We have one of the highest booster fees. And part of that is because our maintenance costs for our field is pretty high. We try to take care of that every year, if not every other year. So that's a big drain on us. So that's why we have both a fundraiser and pretty high boosters on top of all the regular needs. And some baseball equipment isn't, like baseball pants are not the best to be used year after year after year. You've seen how your boys can go through a pair of pants. So just some of our costs our equipment costs become a little high. So this would help subsidize that a little bit, the need for.
And the only thing we would have like on that top list, if you can pull that back up again, Rebecca, please. That we have to kind of be mindful of with softball is probably around like that diamond care, which is the infield. It's the infield fill and some of the maintenance of it. So we have to make sure that we're treating both of those. And that's an annual or biannual cost that you guys have. This is for maintenance of that internal field. So we have to make sure that we are doing that and responsibly on both fields.
I'm okay with this proposal and the fundraising that you guys do.
Well, I think we're doing it for soccer, we're doing it for softball, and I don't see how we can turn this down. Right,
So on the high visibility sides, do you want input from us on that, or do you want to? I mean, I think that's a good idea. There's definitely some advantage to advertising them.
The initial numbers that have been thrown around have been like 2,500 a year. Which for a premium spot, I don't know. I'm not sure what company would be okay with. But I don't know what a billboard to get in Waunakee cost, but I mean, that would be similar kind of visibility, probably a almost cheaper rate.
Probably
My initial thought on it, I'm not really for it. It's not part of, you're going in there to a game and that's where you're watching it, because you can take all the other facilities of soccer, you could put it on the outside of those fences too, and.
Soccer does have one on the outside, in the back of their scoreboard, they have a big summit field. They have a summit sign on the back of the scoreboard,
back of the school.
which is visible from the road.
And one of the questions about the exterior ones is, particularly the ones that are along the road, is are there any other pieces with the village with regards to signage that would have to be cleared out? I think it may be a point to approve the internal ones like Ted is saying, and then at a future point, take a look at the other ones.
I think the other thing you gotta do is be consistent with softball, so softball is charging $750. I don't see how we can sit down and say you can charge $1,000, it's not those. So I think that's probably something that we can look at so that there's consistency. And I agree, the inside. Fencing.
So we just will be looking for a motion for the December board meeting then.
I'd make a motion to fill this to the December board meeting.
I guess motions then should include on the inside, so consideration along with consistency between softball and baseball. Person. If that's what you need.
Yep.
And you're seconding that?
I'll
Jeff?
second that.
Way to make the motion.
Is there any other discussion you guys want to have?
You have that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
Have a good day.
You as well.
I'm still looking at boxes.
Okay, your pitch consideration for this homework.
So just a little background, I know Ted isn't on the budget committee, but last maybe May or June, the budget committee asked for an update on where Warrior Pitch was at, where Warrior Stadium was at, and the other fundraising efforts that we've had as the district. And what we shared at that time was that the Warrior Pitch project was fully paid off. So that's the money that was donated, sent to WAIF. So WAIF held the funds for us and we pulled it back from WAIF as the project continued. So the initial work at the Warrior Pitch was completely paid for. And now there's a positive balance remaining. And so we do have some proposals for scoreboard. And then in addition to that, we're going to be meeting with Dave. So Randy and I are going to meet with Dave to revisit the dialogue about the team center and the quotes that we received in the past and moving forward potentially in a different way than what we have received quotes on before. So we're going to be having that discussion soon. And at some point we'll bring that back to the committee. But just know that the Waunakee pitch is completely paid for. There's a positive balance. It was obviously a very, very successful fundraising program. And Dave has offered to continue to volunteer his time to help lead discussions over future improvements at the pitch. And so we'll just pass it over to Dave. If you want to share any thoughts about the scoreboard or anything else regarding the fundraising?
Yeah, so, we looked at, long-term, we looked at, the improvements to the pitch as a multi-phase project. You might recall that, the first phase was certainly getting the new surface put in. It certainly worked towards our benefit over the course of the last couple of years, and has created a truly safer environment for both boys and girls teams, to play on. We did come forward before with a proposal for replacing the scoreboard. At that point, it was decided to defer until the fundraising was completely done with respect to the pitch. And we're now at that point. The scoreboard itself, is well over 25 years old, I believe. You cannot get parts for it anymore. Prior to at the beginning of the girls' season last year, the scoreboard, did not work. And so there was a little bit of a scramble to, find some components to fix the scoreboard. There was a couple games in which there was a field clock put down on the field. I think they borrowed it from possibly track in order to, assure that we were meeting the WIA responsibilities and regulations around having proper timing on the field. For the boys season, we had a couple glitches, but, the system worked okay. The biggest issue is, the communication between the board itself and the operating system for the board. They're not of the same type of systems. And, again, I think the facilities team has done a great job just cobbling together, to make sure that it works. As we're going through a winter season again, and then coming into the spring, I have big questions on whether or not that board is actually going to even be able to fire up, this springtime. As Steve indicated, we are sitting with a positive balance in our WAIF account. We're going to continue to grow that balance to support other activities at the stadium, but certainly the biggest need right now is to replace the existing scoreboard because of its questionable functionality and move forward with a new board. We do have a couple quotes that were secured, I think in August. So we may have to take those out again, and get them requoted. There's really three parts to this, one of which is the installation. The installation includes just setting up the scoreboard. We did take the initiative to put in the base and the foundation for the existing scoreboard, as well as the support arms that go up towards it. So those are already in place. This is just basically $25.75 specifically for mounting the scoreboard, hooking it up, etc. Rebecca, if you could go to the other quote. The other quote is for the scoreboard itself. Our recommendation is to go with the lesser expensive one. It's model number 2008, I believe. It's the first one. The price of the scoreboard itself is $18,207 with an optional feature of the mobile score app and kit. Our recommendation is we might as well go ahead with that as well. I'll be honest with you, I don't know what that entails. I'm assuming it's communication between the main system and the board itself. I don't know if it allows us to control the board with an app. But what my understanding is, the recommendation is, if you're going to go with that investment, you might as well throw the electronics on there as well. So the total,
The coaches to change the score.
that would be great. Maybe I'd shot it. Stop time. I don't know. Speed up time. But all told, again, I think, these are dated in August. We'll probably want to put it back out, because I'm not sure if Daktronics will honor the prior bid. But we do have ample funds within our wave account to be able to support this moving forward. And so I guess we are asking for, approval to move forward with the scoreboard replacement project.
So one of the things is we've got or at least since I've been involved, is replacement of the turf after 15 years. How does this affect that?
Yeah, great question. So the board has been committed on an annual basis to direct me to set aside funding at the end of every fiscal year for both Warrior Stadium and Warrior Pitch. So we've now set aside funding 2 times for the Warrior Pitch. And by the time we get to the replacement cycle for either one of the fields, the full balance of what would be necessary for the replacement will be sitting inside our fund balance. So that was a direction that the board asked us to implement when these fields were originally being installed. So the board as a whole was thinking ahead towards that replacement process, and those funds will be available if and when we get to that time frame.
Do those funds come from gate receipts?
They come from gate receipts. Yeah, the board directed taking the first X amount out of gate receipts. And that was accounted for in the previous recommendation in October to take the remainder of the gate receipts to reinvest in the athletic department for the Title IX report. So in total, now all of the gate receipts from the athletic programs are being funneled back to the athletic program. It's just that the first portion of it is being set aside for turf replacement on both fields. Then the remainder is being utilized for those items that you saw in that Title IX report. So thanks for asking.
Do you remember how much you put inside?
Off the top of my head, it's either like 30 or 35,000 for each field. And I think the thought was it would last like 12 years and the replacement was somewhere in the $400,000 range when we looked at this way back with Warrior Stadium.
We have probably a number of scoreboards, right, for all the different facilities. Are they all Daktronics? Is there any? I assume.
Yeah, we're needing for the Daktronics for sure.
That's what they're moving to, Ted. I think the previous manufacturer, that's where we started to replace them with ones that have common controllers. And some of the ones that we have, as Dave shared, we just can't get parts for. So I think Mike from the maintenance crew has done a great job of corralling as many parts as he's been able to keep them going until they're at the point where we need to replace them, which is where we're at today.
The football field is Daktronics.
So we would just be requesting a motion to bring this to the next board meeting for approval, and then just for the committee to note that at some point, Randy and Dave and I will sit down and talk about again the second phase of fundraising and what that looks like, and we'll certainly bring that back to this committee some point in the near future.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Would it change?
No, I wasn't.
Dave, thanks for your leadership in fundraising.
My appreciation. Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a good day. Have a great day. Next, we'll ask the Vogel folks to come up and join us. And one thing I'm just going to share about the presentation that we provided is there's slides in here that provide a frame of reference for the discussions that took place in the summer. these are more of a reminder for the general public and anyone who might be viewing this, that we can connect together what was planned over the summer versus where we are today. So you will see when we get into like the Heritage Elementary School, a slide from the summer and then an updated slide that Jay is going to talk about, you know, kind of where we're at now and what the plans are over the next couple of months. But for each of these, we kind of have a reference point for anyone who might be watching this. Okay, Rebecca, if you want them to scroll through. We're going to talk about the budget. We're going to do some updates on the schedules, talk about next steps, and then we do have some items for discussion and consideration with the committee. Keep going. So this is just a reminder that back in July, Jay was here and presenting to the board his overall approach for costing the initial budgets and what they were based on. I think the most important thing is to keep in mind probably the top bullet point that back then Jay was working off a conceptual scope of work, basically square footage information, site information, and then utilize that. And obviously, as we get further along the process, that turns into more concrete information. But just as a reminder as to what we were using back in July during this discussion. Okay. And at Heritage, this was the information we shared with the board and the community back in July. So back in July, you saw the image on the right, which was one of the earlier images as to what the site would look like with Heritage there. On the left was the project budget. Okay, Rebecca. Now we're going to have Jay talk a little bit about where we're at today and what are the next steps at Heritage over the next several months.
Perfect. So, as Steve mentioned, you can see the July image, and then on the right is the last image that the board saw. So you can tell, obviously, there's been a little bit more definition as to the site and the shape of the building. And now the team's really working on what's inside of the orange as far as layouts of classrooms and flow throughout both levels of the school. From a budget perspective, we're going to be getting a package from the EUA team actually tomorrow on the 30th. And then we'll be doing a really deep dive to do a budget update based on that package. And so on the left-hand side here, what you see is just a summary of the budget that we presented in July. Noting, the portion there, that's the construction budget, the contingency. So a reminder on the contingency that had 15% contingency, but also escalation built into that based on numbers we reviewed at those board meetings. And then again, the soft cost is design fees, furnitures, fixtures, equipment, and other fees outside of the hard construction costs. And so, ultimately, as we come back with this budget update in December, we're targeting right before Christmas to have that update. The 63,660,000 is our target. We want to beat that target, but the three numbers up above that are all likely going to be different as we update.
Question, when you start looking at water retention and flow and things like that, we had a challenge at the Prairie School where, we looked at the site and then they came back and said, well, you got to look at not only the site, but everything around it. Are you, as you develop your water retention plan, are you doing that same thing, taking the appropriate region of the land versus just our property?
Yeah, so Roxanne Johnson is the civil engineer on the project. Professional Engineering LLC is her organization. And Jack, you can see some of the green areas maybe up to the top left of that yellow area, and then there's a triangle one down at the bottom.
Okay.
Those are the two main areas, but I think there's going to be 4 or 5 different areas where there will be stormwater management ponds or retention or detention ponds. It's actually going to need to be set up to handle a 200-year event, where intermediate, when that was designed originally, it was just for a 100-year event.
So that's every other year now instead.
Right. So yeah, we actually were on a call last week talking about how we balance the site and how we need to figure out the actual size of modifying that large pond that's there, the one on the south side.
So when you do that, are you looking at just our property or are you looking at the flow in the region?
She has taken into account both of them, Jack, but the design really is, for your property, they look at quantity and quality. So quantity is the amount of water, and quality is cleaning it up. And so your facility, your continued property has to handle a 200-year event and release it off your property, just like as if it was not developed.
Understand?
So,
I just don't want to get into another situation.
yeah. And Roxanne could answer those questions probably a lot better than you. But yeah, that's definitely, and Roxanne actually was one of the consultants that started her design pre-referendum, pre-vote, and so she's really advanced that to a spot where she'll be completing the next month or so. And so from a budget perspective, like I said, ultimately we had the concepts back in July that we budgeted on. We're going to have a lot better information here tomorrow to be able to update those budgets. So we feel good about being able to put a really detailed budget together by the end of this month or right before the holiday. And then as you look at the schedule specific to the new intermediate or the new heritage site on the intermediate, is we have different packages. So what that means is portions of the drawing are going to be finished in design while other portions are not. And that was really to allow us to hit that schedule that we've been talking about for the last 6 months. And so bid package 1 is ultimately going to be the site work. So all of the drawings for the site will be complete towards the end of January, early February. Then bid package 2 is what we call the structural package. So that'll have your concrete foundation and your structural steel will be finalized in late February, early March, and then we can get final pricing in March for that. And then bid package 3 would be the remainder of the building. So that would have a lot of your finishes on the outside of the building and a lot of all the finishes on the inside of the building. We are targeting an April start. So the reason I bring up these 3 packages is we won't have the design fully complete before we start, which is not atypical on almost all of our projects like that, just from a scheduling standpoint. But as you see in May, we will have everything complete. So it'll only be a month or 2 after we start construction, everything will be complete, and then what final numbers for everything. So what this means is that ultimately we're going to want to set a guaranteed maximum price with the district. We're prepared to be able to do that after bid package 1 or 2, depending on what the desire of the district is, but obviously we want that in place prior to us starting. Guaranteed maximum price is us saying the project will cost no more than this number. And then of course, any savings throughout that project will return back to the district to be used on other projects. The other aspect I want to hit on is the contingency number. Obviously, our whole team wants to manage to that contingency to be able to release some of those funds for other projects as well. As you look at the timing we've outlined with the budget updates, following that March 23 or when we would likely set the GMP, I think would be an appropriate spot to where we maybe be able to identify some of those contingencies that couldn't be used for other projects. And as we get into some of the other slides today, you'll see timing wise that what we've targeted for this summer on some of the other projects not related to the elementary and middle school, but that just gives you an idea of timing. And then by end of May, ultimately what hard numbers for the entire scope of the work. So that could be another point where we're saying, okay, now we need to see a 3% or 4%, and anything above that can be used to help.
Okay, might go to the next slide. Jay, you wanted to talk a little bit more about some additional partnerships?
Yeah. So, way back when we were talking schedule all summer, what we identified was what some key construction partners that need to be on the team to be able to meet the schedule. We've already gone through that with the HVAC, the electrical, the plumbing, and the steel supply. This is the next group of partners that we feel need to be on the team in January and February. This is gonna be a little bit of a different process than HVAC electrical plumbing in that we'll have documents to be able to get bids on this scope of work. The document's just going to be complete, as I just outlined on the last slide, timing wise. They'll be close to complete, but not complete. So like the earthwork, we'll be able to take out a package here right after Christmas to get competitive bids from earthwork contractors. And then go through a selection and award process that we would engage the district in reviewing that process. Similar with fire protection, precast is still on the fence. We had a design meeting last week and discussed that there likely isn't going to be a need for precast. That one may not apply, but if there is a need for precast, either floor plank or wall plank, that'd be one we need to get in the queue early just from the schedule lead time. Then the next two, so concrete ready mix, so that would be actually just the supply of all the concrete that would go in the foundation, footings and slab on grade. That we'd like to go in February, and then also the concrete reinforcement in February, and that would give us the ability to have that material on site when we're gonna need it. Building the foundation. Again, both of those will be able to have drawings that are pretty far along, so it can be competitive pricing. It's just not gonna be complete.
Any other questions about heritage before we jump into the middle school? If not, this slide was just again a reminder of what we presented in July, and then Rebecca, if you want to go to the next one, and then Jay just wanted to provide some high level timeline estimates as far as where we might be going with the schedule for the middle school.
Yep. One thing to note too, based on the push on elementary, the design team has not done anything on middle school yet. The target is to wait until late January, once we're in a good spot in elementary design. And then based on the schedule for the middle school, we don't have to do those multiple packages. So it's a little cleaner here in that we just have a schematic, budget, design development, and construction documents. Ultimately, really the goal and point of this slide is to show you that by the end of 23, we'll have a really good idea of what contingency dollars will be left over between both projects. Will be applied to the maintenance list or any other capital projects that want to play with that.
Just a kind of an update for me, anyways. In the geothermal standpoint in this building, you're going to use that basically that field plus go into the track area as well.
Yeah,
And are we planning on resurfacing that track then after we?
yeah,
The whole track, or is it gonna just be fixing?
Get redone, I think, Jack, when they do the geothermal piece.
yeah, we had, in that budget, we had money to resurface that track, but Jack, assuming that we have to go there. Ultimately, we'll have to do a conductivity test there to figure out exactly where the field should be. The other thing we're looking at the elementary school is the potential to go to 500-foot deep bores instead of 300. Actually, the intermediate might be 350 or 400, but a little bit deeper, so you have less of them. In Dane County, that's been successful to go just based on the low grade conductivity. Going with 500-foot deep ones and less borders has been successful. So depending on how that shakes out with the middle school, maybe we don't have to be in the track footprint, but until we do this test, we won't.
But even though, are we still planning on resurfacing the
Yeah.
track?
Those dollars are in the budget, but
So
we need to do it with the
Currently an asphalt track, or do you plan to make it the modern material like we have at Warrior? Or is it like for like?
I priced it with a traditional modern track resurfacing, but if you want an asphalt, obviously
I think the modern
more
is
cost effective.
better for the student athletes, but I'm not the expert though.
So this was the slide that we shared again in July about the $5 million worth of projects that primarily were located at the high school, but then some additional work at the TLC in the district office. And Rebecca, if you want to go to the next slide. So at the end of this presentation, we have a discussion about some potential action items. And the first one is really related to what you see on this slide. We've sketched out some concepts with how to spread this work out between 2023 and 2026. And the concepts would be starting with the bleacher extension to Warrior Stadium. So getting that accomplished right away. And the furniture package in the high school library, getting that ready for next school year. Then the rest of the high school work will require design. And our design team is really tied up at Heritage right now. So the thought is that we would be able to free them up once we get past the heavy lifting at Heritage, get them going on the middle school, to put together the drawings for the high school to get out to bid for the summer of 24. Followed up by the following year, the work here, and the following year, the work at the TLC. So it looks as being spread out over the next couple of years. You'll see when we get to the final slide, there was discussion on the track this fall with the committee. We're going to tie that in our recommendations to the bleacher extension, that we feel we should do the work in that area all at once and get it done. So you'll see that on a later slide, that this is our initial thought on how to spread that work out over the next couple of years. And we'll come back to this at the end of the presentation.
One quick thing too to note, the other strategy here was if we look in 2024, it's all the high school work inside the building, and from an economy of scale standpoint, that looks really nice to be able to put out a set of documents to bid where subs could be in every area of the school versus doing 2 spots one summer and saying, hey, you got to come back next summer to do 2 other areas.
Steve, where do you see the lighting on the softball field?
So we do have that coming up in our recommendation slide. So thank you for asking. That's not on here because that wasn't on the initial list that went with this $5 million. But yeah, we will have that in just a moment. Rebecca, if you want to keep going. The last component regarding the budget, if you recall, to get to the 175 on the far right, we had identified $6.4 million for maintenance. That then totaled between all 4 of those components, the total of the referendum. So Rebecca, if you want to go to the next slide. What we want to do with the maintenance list is just share with you our intentions. So John and I have an afternoon already blocked off with the Vogel team to head over to their offices where we're going to spend the entire afternoon really prioritizing the complete list. Our intention is to bring that list back to this committee so that you have the opportunity to look at it. We would identify also any projects not currently in the list to make sure that you're aware of them, and then identify the timing of those projects as well. The initial thinking is that we would present to you a plan that is based on the budgetary dollars that are available now. But then you would see, as Jay referenced, if contingency dollars are freed up on other projects, you would then be able to see kind of what's next on the list and then what would be further down on the list. And so you could have a full scope of it. So our intention is to bring that back to this committee for a deeper dive in that, probably have a committee meeting just only to do that, coming somewhere in the early February timeframe. And so just wanted to keep you informed as our intentions to bring that back as well. Rebecca, if you want to keep going. I mean, Jay really talked about the schedule as we went through those slides. So let's just jump into the final piece as far as what's next. So the discussion we were hoping to have today are on a couple of different topics. The first one is really the accounting funds that are used for capital maintenance projects. So just as a reminder, the board had a 3-year plan to use what's called our Fund 41, our capital projects fund, to pay for projects. We were then going to close that fund and move funds into Fund 10 instead. This past year, the budget committee recommended separating out the $300,000 that we had set aside for the prior fiscal year. So we will continue doing that over the next couple of years. But our recommendations would be to have John put together what we consider to be our standard capital project list for the summer, using what remains of Fund 41. So we would bring that to this committee for you to see it. And then the work that we're talking about with Vogel Brothers would be what's called Fund 49, which is referendum funding. And then ultimately, we would, during this next 5-year period of time, would continue to build up a maintenance fund balance in Fund 10. So what I'm proposing would be basically completing that board's goal of closing Fund 41, shifting to the referendum funds for the maintenance list, and then ultimately not spending that $300,000 each year in Fund 10 to allow it over the next 5 years to ultimately build up to, let's call it maybe $1.5 million after 5 years. That would then be available to the board once all of this work is done. So we'd really be establishing a nice maintenance fund moving forward. It certainly isn't something you have to decide today, just something to think about as we move forward. But the intentions would be for John to bring to you at some point in the spring, like he traditionally has done, with some projects to use the remainder of the Fund 41 money. The second thing is the varsity softball field lights. So if you can recall, this was even prior to the Title IX report. The village shared with us that there was the potential to put lights on the softball varsity field. The village basically created an airport ordinance, which didn't exist before, which created the ability for us to do that. So back when the village was doing that, we hired Rettler, which is the civil engineering firm that has done some work on our athletic fields, to work with the village to make sure that lights on that softball field would work. And so all of that is done. So that was already done prior to the village approving that ordinance. What we're looking to do is have this committee consider bringing that to the school board for moving ahead with a target date of this spring. So the important thing to note is that really the work's been done on this already by the firm Rettler. It would just be having them go back to the village, get permission to move forward with whatever process the village wants to use, and then order the poles. So we're in really good shape with this one to be able to do this sooner rather than later if this committee would like to do that. And again, that could come out of Fund 41. There were some of the remainder funds that we have there, or it could come out of Fund 49, the referendum funds. It really doesn't matter. It's just, do you want to do that project? And if you do you want to do it right away? Because the potential is there to do it right away. You did also see that we were talking about doing the high school library furniture off that list and getting that ready for the start of the next school year. And then the next item that you saw that we had on the list was the high school bleacher extension. So what we're suggesting is we pair that up with a review of the track. And for this project, we're recommending a proposal from Roxanne Johnson, who is the civil engineer from our community. Roxanne did a good amount of the work on Warrior Stadium when it was initially designed. She did a lot of the local approval parts of it. Her brother has a specialty in working on tracks. He's in SOC. So we'd be contracting with Roxanne, but just like at the middle school, Roxanne included in her proposal, working with her brother on the track parts of it, because he's built multiple tracks, including college tracks. So what we're looking at doing, if we want to get this project ready for next summer, we're suggesting that what we have on the screen right now, that if we want to get those going, we would need to get moving on them. We're not asking the committee to approve bids on any of these right now. It's more so the planning. Ultimately, you'd have to approve the lights. We'll have to bring you bids back. It's way beyond what administration can approve. So the board would have to approve it anyways. Board has to approve library furniture. All of this has to be approved. What we're looking for is, do you want us to plan to bring these bids back and get these particular pieces moving?
I guess one question I have is, what kind of warranty do we get them on these projects? The track has been, a nightmare since they put it in, and basically we paid for it, and it wasn't necessarily done correctly. And next thing you know, we're paying for it, and the vendor walks away. What assurance do we have that we can give taxpayers that, we're going to get quality? Did the same thing on the baseball field, spend $100,000 on the baseball field because the baseball field wasn't done correctly. I think as a taxpayer, it's frustrating, where we can bring vendors in here and they don't have to necessarily meet the requirements, and then we pay to correct them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jack. And the one thing I would say about the track is, when we did the work, when Warrior Stadium had the turf put in, it was not a complete rebuild, which, looking back on it, probably would have been the right thing to do. That would have been significantly more expensive. But what we're going to do this time is look for Roxanne, and then to partner with her brother to build that modern track that we would expect to last for a very long time. The track coach has been communicating about a different surface for a track, one that is being put in when districts are building tracks today. So we would be looking for an opportunity basically to take a different approach this time. We would not be looking at resurfacing it. We would be looking at rebuilding it.
I guess what I'd like to do is have some type of warranty on that.
Sure.
As well. So that in 5 years, if this thing crumbles, it's not district funds that are, that are making that correction.
What we could do, if you're okay with the idea of the planning part, is we can absolutely communicate that to Roxanne, who will be creating the design, that it is an intent of the board to have as long as possible of a warranty and as tight as possible, to make sure that we put ourselves in a better position this time.
Right.
And I don't know, Jay, do you have anything you can share?
I mean, you're exactly right. I was gonna say Roxanne can build that into specification. One thing I would recommend is that, her brother's gonna know what that standard warranty on a track is. Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I would recommend the documents have the standard one, and then you ask for incremental, what it's gonna cost you to buy another 5 years or 10 years, just so you know where you're spending your money.
So committee members' thoughts on?
I think it's a good idea to move forward and get some of these projects.
Second, was that a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Jay, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I think we should circle up next week on maybe lead time of those light poles. I don't know if I'll
Sure.
confirm that or not, but just timing wise, I think that'd be a good idea, even bleachers, so we'll track that down just to make sure that we meet next week.
We already made a motion later, but one thing with those lights, I think it came up in discussion the last time. obviously the ordinance was set, so the light can be positioned where it works, maybe it isn't ideal. But then we thought it's in a residential area, is there any concern with that resident that needs to be worked out or at least brought up? Just so we don't run into something after the fact on that.
Right, we definitely have heard from at least one of the neighbors who has been a longtime resident of that area of town. Who is concerned about the possibility of lights. This person was also concerned about the sponsorship banners that went up and definitely has strong feelings about anything that happens on the field. So we're gonna wanna make sure that at a minimum, that person is aware of the process that the village puts in place. So they know where they would be able to go to express their concerns. But I do expect that will come up, and I definitely agree with you, Ted, that we've got to factor in as much as possible, minimizing any light impact outside of the stadium. If not, that's all we have.
Do you want to set any future meetings now? Or?
Okay, what are your thoughts on timing about the information on the budgets and when?
Yeah,
we could maybe.
Rebecca, could you go back to the,
Presentation?
yeah. Let's go back to the elementary slides if we could. The partner slide and then the one prior to that.
Because any bids that we would receive in, we have to tie in these meetings the
Yeah,
right way.
so that's why I was thinking right here that we would want something maybe like the third week or towards the end of January for approval on the Earth Board Fire Protection precast. And then I was intending that our schematic design budget update would just be with the district as kind of part of our core team. And I don't know, you know, at that time, we could give a high level overview of budget update to the facility committee too.
So we could meet prior to the January board meeting.
Yeah, it's that January board meeting like the second, that'd be right.
Probably.
Kind of early. January working with you tonight.
So you're not gonna get your bids to.
Yeah, we wouldn't have earthwork or fire protection by that time.
So you're probably looking at like third week in January.
So should we wait until January to set that meeting?
Yeah, I think we probably could, because
And
then you'll
so
have
then
that.
you'll know.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
can set
That
it.
makes sense.
I was saying sometime like the week of the 23rd would make sense.
And is that the week after convention?
Oh, no,
Yes.
you're right, that means,
Yeah, we'd want to go.
or no, it's the week after.
We'd want to go the week after.
The week after.
23rd.
Yeah, we can wait till November. All right, thanks everybody for your time today.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
So my answer last night, I did 4 times 4